What's up, guys? Dehvin Simms here, back with another live stream. I want to also give a shout out to my new subscribers for joining the movement where we help men experience life, travel, and finances. As a community, we help men level up and become high value in the modern world today. Do make sure you hit that like and subscribe button so you don't miss out. So, without further ado, let's get in the live stream. Right now, I'm actually here at Bijan. Did I see that right?
Yes, sir.
And he's here to actually talk about Mexican women as well as traveling to Mexico. So it's definitely going to be interesting. So, Bijan, introduce yourself to the viewers.
Hi, I'm Bijan Bain. I'm a contributor to some of the travel and lifestyle outlets such as Travel Trend and Just Lux. And I'm a former contributor to Afar Online. And again, thanks for having me on to share some experiences about one of the countries that I visited in my travels, not only on my own, but as a hospitality journalist.
No problem, man. Glad to have you on. Definitely an honor. So, what made you come to Mexico?
First time was to visit a relative. I was about 19. The second time was probably a media trip, and it was probably Cancun. Third time was a media trip, Playa del Carmen, which is in the same state as Cancun, Quintana Roo, or what they call the Mexican Riviera. Uh, Later on, although I've been to Cancun or Playa del Carmen once or twice since then, which was about 2011, 2013-ish. Later on, the first time I went to Puerto Vallarta was a media trip during the Day of the Dead, which was October 2019, right around Halloween. The same year, 2019, I went to the West Coast. Well, Puerto Vallarta is on the west, but what they call the Baja region of the West Coast for the first time, which is Cabo San Lucas. I had never been there before, so I went there. It had to be January because I think February is the last season you could do whale watching, so it had to be January because right before the whale watching um, sort of ended in terms of optimal times to see them. And then since then, September of 2019, for business, to meet a guy that was wanted to talk to me about a writing project for his new company, a new startup. He flew me into, well, he actually flew me into Texas, but then from Texas, from where he lived, which was Austin, we drove to Laredo to the border. And when we got to the border, we drove from Laredo to San Miguel de Allende, which is more in the center of the country. So different times, different reasons, but a lot of them, again, were media tours to write hotel or hospitality or tourism articles about either the region or the property I was staying at or both. But not all of them. Like I said, some of them were personal trips.
Oh, wow. So, what time of the year do you think is the best time to travel to Mexico?
Well, they're all different. I mean, California is different than closer to Texas, and Gulf of Mexico, where Playa del Carmen and Cancun is different than the West. You know, the weather is different. The states are different. Um, some are beachy, some aren't. Like there's San Miguel de Allende is more landlocked. It's not beachy because it's closer to Texas. It's not close to Texas. It's a 13-hour drive, but it's in the center, so it's not as coastal as beachy. I would say all the places I've been, the weather was temperate, you know, like about 80, 78, maybe a little bit cooler at night. So Playa del Carmen or Cancun, if you want to be sort of in a hotel that's close to the beach or water, or you're touring ruins like pyramids and things like that, ancient ruins, Mayan ruins. Puerto Vallarta is more kind of spread out, more urban. Not as much in terms of like the ancient things. movie theater, just spread it, just more developed like a city. The hotel zone is pretty long, on mostly on one side of the highway, but in some instances probably on both sides. A lot of retail, a lot of shopping, really nice restaurants. Then there's kind of a quieter section of town where they have a lot of art galleries and boutiques. You can visit a lot of artists, some of whom are American. Um, San Miguel de Allende is small. It's only about 80,000 people. There's probably a good 400 American expats living there, mostly middle-aged, like second career or retired, like in their 40s, 50s, or 60s. But there's a lot of Americans there. It's nice and quiet. It's walkable. It's not touristy in any sense. Not a lot of chain hotels or anything like that. If you go to Cancun and places like that, it's warm most of the year, I would imagine. I've never been there. I'm trying to think if I've been in the winter. Oh, yeah. The first time I went to Cancun, or second time, it was February because it was snowing. It snowed in DC like after I left. Pretty decent snowstorm. So it had to be like February, like early February, right around the Super Bowl or something like that. So that stays warm. But there's a ton of hotels. Playa del Carmen is like right by Cancun. It's just smaller. And if you go to Playa del Carmen, there's a long shopping promenade they call Fifth Avenue. It's not like Fifth Avenue. It's more like a vendors on both sides. You've probably been there. Vendors on both sides of this long shopping promenade. They have ice cream places to sell NFL football jerseys from the teams in Texas, basketball jerseys from all the teams and the pro teams in Texas, jewelry, leather, things like that. But they just call it Fifth Avenue. So it's warm there. Puerto Vallarta, I don't know how cold that gets. Like I said, I was there around the time of the American Halloween, or what they call Dia de los Muertos in Mexico, the Day of the Dead ceremonies, when people commemorate their family members that have died or passed on, their ancestors. So it was still pretty warm then. And San Miguel de Allende, I was there like mid-September to late September, and I had on short sleeves. Some days shorts, some days like track pants or sweatpants. So I've never really been anywhere where it was cool or cold, even when I was in flat or mountainous parts of the country. So I guess it depends on what you're going there for, whether you're going there to go to the beach, or whether you're going there for a festival, or whether you're going there just because your vacation just happens to be a particular time of year, or you're going there to low season, where the rooms don't cost as much. So I guess some of those places you might want to go when the room rates are lower. So you might want to look that up and see when the high season and when the low season is, so that you're not spending as much money on your room.
How's the food in restaurants there?
It varies. Some parts of the country more fish. Some parts of the country more like I guess fried and more of empanadas, enchiladas, kind of things that Mexican Americans eat in the States. But you can order anything. Like if you go to a place like Aman Resorts, the property in Puerto Vallarta, they'll have like 5 restaurants. So one of them will be French or sometimes Italian. One will be like Mexican traditional. One might be Asian. It's not an all-inclusive. It's a regular hotel. But there's more than one restaurant in that property. I think the JW Marriott in Cancun has more than one restaurant. But there's generally like a Mexican, what they consider a Mexican restaurant with Mexican food. So more like, a lot of rice, vegetables, fish, some bean-related dishes. Like I said, some things that would be like turnovers or empanadas or things like that people are familiar with in the States. And then sometimes the Mexican restaurant is the buffet. It just depends on the hotel and the size of the hotel. But if you stay at some place like, say, the Riu in Cancun, or the one of the larger hotels in Playa del Carmen, there's going to be several types of food on the property. And then, of course, some people eat off the property. Some days they go out and they just want to have, like a dinner. So it depends on what you like.
Mm.
But they kind of tailor it to the tourists, so it's not going to be as spicy as if you were to go in town and eat at a restaurant where the people that live there eat. Puerto Vallarta had good. They all had good food, but some nights we ate in, and then some nights because you're on a press trip, we ate at a restaurant. That they obviously want the writers or the influencers to feature in their stories. So we don't eat at the hotel every night.
Yeah.
They want to vary it up so that you're not only writing about the hotel restaurant.
Man.
But I never had anything that was not tasty. I've been to food tastings there. I've been to cooking classes. Everything's tasty. And I'm not a big spicy food person, but again, like I said, in the hotels, they kind of cook it to the taste of the tourists because you got Germans, Brits, Canadians, Yanks. So they don't cook it like they would cook it in their house for the most part.
So how's the fashion sense there?
It's not big for that. I wouldn't say it's Montreal or anything. It's people dress pretty plainly because in some of those cities, most of the people work in tourism. So they're wearing like a business attire if they're behind the front desk. In the cities that are, more touristy, like some parts of Puerto Vallarta, although a lot of people have regular jobs in Puerto Vallarta that aren't related to that. San Miguel de Allende, not as much because they don't have big hotels. They have some smaller hotels, but they're like, 10 room, 8 room. They're not big. So you don't see a lot of people dressed in uniform. But it's not some place where, except maybe like on weekends when people go out or like a couple women going out, with their girlfriends or something like that. It's not super huge on fashion, like trendy wearing things that people wear up here. It's more people dress almost like a little bit more like if they were in a small town, even though some of these places I'm naming are not small towns. Just practical wear because it's warm. The guys aren't super dressy because a lot of people are sort of Mayan or sort of indigenous, and they don't dress up too much because most of them are working class. So they're either going to sell food, they're vendors, they're in sort of middle class jobs. They're not real dressy. Now you do see some dressy people in the bigger cities. Obviously, there's people that work in banks or universities and stuff like that, but it's not some place where you're looking at what people have on, like if you were in New York or Montreal. It's not trendy. I say at the most, maybe some people might have a designer bag, but I didn't even notice a lot of that. It's kind of like this. They wear the same stuff that they would have been wearing in the 80s because it's hot outside. 80s, 90s, 2000s.
Mm. So
And
no view.
some of it is just like an ethnic thing. Like Mayans don't really dress super Western. I mean, they don't dress in traditional or regional garb, but they kind of dress down because, like I said, most of them come from the working or middle class. So that's just not one of their big things. You see a lot of guys cowboy hat. You see a lot of guys boots. It depends on the part of the country.
Yeah. Yeah, it definitely is interesting, man.
Heavy belt. You see a lot of guys with heavy belts, jeans, and the women more plainly like I can't describe the dress, but it's almost like a peasant dress or like a very modest print dress. Not super. Some of the professional women don't dress like that, but it's not a place where when you're walking down the street, you're like, oh, you're just looking at people's clothes.
Man. So how often do you usually see rodeos there?
Well, if you go to Playa del Carmen or Cancun, which, like I said, are right next to each other, there's a park that's like a big park that has water attractions, a zoo, a bird aviary, a nightly show that depicts the history of the country. And the park is called Xelha, XEL hyphen HA. And in Xelha, there's a rodeo every day.
Mm,
And there's like a horse. Uh, there's rodeo every day, and there's like sort of like the prancing horses, or the guys that do the guys and women that do um, they call it paso. I don't know what the term would be in English, but the horses that are trained to walk in a certain manner, they do that every day, like at a certain time every day. It's probably more popular in the states that are closer to Texas. So you don't see it unless you go to like an arena and they have it. It's not common, at least in the parts where I was. You wouldn't necessarily see it. We never had a rodeo on our schedule when I was there, except like I said, when they take you to this big. It's not a theme park, but it might as well be one. This place called Shelha, where they have just it's not Shelha. It's called Xcaret. Xcaret. Shelha is the water park. But in Xcaret, there's literally like a rodeo at a certain time, like 3:30 or something like that, once a day. But I don't know how common it is for people to live down there all year round to go to rodeo. I'm not sure.
mm.
I didn't hear it come up a lot, and we didn't pass any places when we were driving from one place to another, like to go eat or to go back to the property where you see signs for rodeos or rodeos on billboards or anything like that.
Mm. Now I'm sure everybody wants to know, man.
Well, like
How?
I said, there's such a overlap of the culture between like the Texas side and the Mexico side, and I've never been near El Paso, so I
Yeah,
haven't been to like the Juarez, where a lot of people go back and forth to Mexico or Texas almost like every day, or just to shop and stuff like that.
yeah.
And I haven't been to Tijuana, which is like the same thing, but it's California. Like people go back and forth to the border every day. But I really didn't hear rodeo. Like even when I was watching TV, I didn't see much reference to rodeo. But it's a big country, so it's hard to say. It's got a lot of states. It's a big country.
Mm,
It would be like saying, do they have rodeo in the U.S.? I mean, Oklahoma, Texas, some parts of the Southwest. But you could go probably a long way in the U.S. and not, in other states and not have any reference to or fan base in rodeos, just certain states. So I imagine it's like that there, but I didn't hear much.
mm.
Even
How are the
bullfighting, I didn't hear. I know it probably exists. Maybe it's in Mexico City, maybe it's in some of the town, but it never came up while I was there. Not like you see in the movies or like you might have heard like 40 or 50 years ago.
yeah,
And maybe
mm,
that's just because people's opinions about it have changed. I don't know if that's the case. Boxing, cockfighting, we didn't do any of these things, but they have pro basketball. Obviously, they have baseball, soccer, of course, because they have national team and then pro teams and leagues and you know different divisions of different levels of soccer leagues, like you know the different tiers of the strength of the league. Those things are big. And they have some other sports as well, but the most popular ones, and this is like I said, different states are into different things, but probably would be, this might not be the right order, but in some order, um, international football and boxing, maybe baseball might be three. I'm just guessing.
mm. So how are the women there in Mexico?
Well, again, it's different because, like I said, if you're in Mexico City, there's going to be more non-Mayan looking women that aren't like short and brown and have Mayan features. There's still some, but not as many as Cancun, where there's going to be a lot because you're on the Riviera. Some of them are going to look more like a person from Spain. And then some people look like a little bit of both, like what they call mestizo or mixed. So you really can't tell where the Spanish starts and where the Indian ends. So very different. San Miguel de Allende, most people look Mayan. So they have pretty much the same features, although some of them are taller, some of them are thinner, some of them are chubbier. I would say like in the east, like around the Gulf of Mexico, Playa del Carmen and Cancun, almost everybody you see is Mayan, although in those parts of the country, because there's a lot of tourism jobs in Cancun, there are women there who moved there from other states because that's where the work is. But they still tend to be like brown. They tend to be Mayan. In Puerto Vallarta, which is, like I said, way west, I didn't see any European looking people. I'm not saying they don't exist, but everybody looked. I'm not sure if they're Mayan out there, but everybody looks indigenous. All the women I saw looked indigenous. But again, almost everybody you see when you're going to and fro, they're just going shopping, they're going to movies, grocery store. All this is pre-pandemic. They're going on their daily errands. They're going to work or coming from work. Other than that, they're probably in their jobs where you can't necessarily see them. So they are pretty quiet looking, pretty modest looking, pretty family oriented, tend to be Catholic, not all Catholic. There's still some remnants of Mayan things in the culture. It depends on where you are. I think it's stronger in the Gulf region, like in Quintana Roo or the Mexican Riviera, like where Cancun and Playa del Carmen is, just because there's still some tourism around Mayan sites and relics. And also in some towns, they've tried to preserve the language because they don't speak well, they speak Spanish, but there's people that can still speak Mayan and they try to preserve it. Whereas in other states, it's not as big of a deal. Of course, not everybody was Mayan. Some people were Aztecs, some people were Olmecs, some people were other things. But most of the women that are like working class, have the features of a Central American person, or what we would call like an Indian. And although all of them don't look, alike, there's like a resemblance that's kind of universal throughout Mexico. And it's not until you're in the capital, like Mexico City, or some of the more white collar profession women in some of the other cities that are not as big as Mexico City, that you start to see more European features and more people that you can tell that they that more of their family members have Spanish ancestry. But a lot of people have both, of course.
Mm. So, what kind of jobs do women usually have in Mexico, from your
Well, if
experience?
they live in, it's like I was telling you about Jamaica. If like people live in Montego Bay, they're more likely to work in a hotel than Ocho Rios because that's where the hotels are. So they're in hospitality. So if they move from another state to live in Quintana Roo, to be close to or in Playa del Carmen or in Cancun, a lot of them are in tourism jobs, whether that be housekeeping, whether that be public relations, marketing, front desk, waitress, restaurant, um, spa. A lot of people are in that trade. If you go to Puerto Vallarta, there's a ton of like massage spas. Like there'll be like sometimes you'll see 3 in the same block, or one right around the corner from another one and another one, another one. And women sitting out front, like in the white uniforms, waiting for customers. There's a lot of pharmacies in Puerto Vallarta too. I'm not sure why that's the case, but there's like pharmacies on like every block. So I guess a lot of people work in that trade. And then banks, Mexico has a lot of banks, so a lot of women work in that. Like I said, some people have vending stands, so they sell things on the street like fruits or clothing or trinkets or tourist items or souvenirs. It's a pretty broad range, and there's probably some housewives too.
Mm. So, what would you say is the best places to actually meet these women?
Well, if you're a tourist and you're in Cancun or Playa del Carmen, to meet people outside the property, because everybody in the property is going to be Canadian or German or US or Brit, you would have to go into the town, maybe go to either a night spot, because there's not going to be a ton of Mexicans in the hotels, especially the higher seasons because it costs more. Just like there's not going to be a lot of Jamaicans in the hotels in Jamaica, although they do go. They tend to go to the all inclusives because it costs less, or they go in the low season, or a lot of them just don't go because they work in that industry, so they don't want to do that for their vacation. They go to the States or Canada. So, I would say in Puerto Vallarta, you would have to go out to eat or shop, like a retail or the grocery store, supermarket. If you speak, if your Spanish is pretty decent. Um, Cancun and Playa del Carmen, away from your property where you're staying, because everybody where you're staying is pretty much going to be from the west or from from a cold place like Germany or the UK or Canada or the States, especially this time of year, because that's when people go. In San Miguel de Allende, there's not a ton of tourism. There's a lot of American expats, but there's not like big Hiltons or Marriotts or W's or Mandarin Oriental. So they don't have the big chain hotels. So pretty much everywhere you go, somebody is from that town. There's not a lot of tourism walking around because the town is only 80,000 people. There are tourists, but they're staying, like I said, in hotels that are like the size of a row house or a guest house, maybe 12 rooms, 14 rooms, 8 rooms. So there, almost every time you leave your house, you're around Mexican women your hotel, you're around Mexican women because to do anything in San Miguel de Allende, you have to go out into the street unless you're taking a meal, like a breakfast on the property or something like that. Some of them probably don't even have dinner because they're almost like the size of a bed and breakfast. So when you go eat, when you go looking at the galleries, when you go shopping, because it's pretty much a walkable town. When you go to the town square, take pictures of the cathedral. If there's a ceremony or ritual in town, those are opportunities to meet women because everybody in the town, it's a walkable town. Everybody's always out and about. They're buying something from one of the food vendors. They're going to the gym. There's a little gym in San Miguel de Allende, a fitness gym. They're coming home from work, so they're always out. It's not like there's a hotel zone and then you have to get a taxi or a cab or rent a car and go someplace to go to a restaurant. You can just walk right down the street if you don't
Yeah.
want to eat. If you don't want to eat where you are, I would say in Puerto Vallarta, it's it's bigger and a little bit more spread out than that. Um, in the Baja in Cabo San Lucas, some of the hotels are nowhere near each other. It's kind of not as developed, and the hotels are not all on one long strip like they are in Cancun. So when you're there, I would imagine you would have to probably either go out to dinner or something like that, or some like a night establishment to really meet women that are Mexican, because Cabo is pretty touristy and it's not super developed. There's not like a hotel everywhere. It's just like long strips that are just dry and like desert and still brown, because it's really just California extended through the south. So you would pretty much have to be out and about to be encountering women that are that live there all year round. And of course, in all the places that I named, there's going to be women in the hotels that are not Mexican. So there's going to be Germans, Brits, Yanks, and Canadians, especially in the winter.
Hmm. Now, for all the brothers out there who want to know, man, are they checking for brothers?
Well, like I said, a lot of people marry relatively young. It's pretty Catholic, although it's not overly religious in some places because there's still some Mayanness. But I would say every place is different because it depends on if you're going to be there long enough to be in a relationship, number one, or whether you're just there for a week because you're on vacation. And number two, if you're in places where people don't work in hospitality and they never really have to use a ton of English, it would depend on how good your Spanish is. But in general, I would say yes, if you have some familiarity with the culture, but not if you're only going to be there a little while, because it's very family oriented. The families tend to be big. Um, you would have to be there for a minute. I don't know, I don't know about the dating app phenomena, but you would have to be there for a minute because if you're just going to be there and back, I don't see how you would develop. Um, because people are going to work, I don't see how you would develop much of a bond or a rapport in that short period of time. Because the person's going to say, "Well, I got to go to work. I don't get off till 7 or 8. Whatever." But if you were to move there, that's different. Or if you were to stay a month, that's different.
Mm. Now, for all the people who's wanting to travel to Mexico, would you tell them to actually learn Spanish before heading over there, or?
It depends on how big the place you're going is. Like I said, if you're going to a touristy place and you're only going to hit on people that work in the hotels and the shops, they had to learn English. Um, if you're venturing out into places where people work more in an independent profession, where they're not in a service industry or an industry with front facing a lot of English speaking customers or English speaking clientele. Um, to be honest, with everybody, it just helps if you know Spanish because you can read the menus, you can understand the directions, you can understand the TV and the radio. It's easier to develop a rapport with somebody if they introduce you to their family members. If you're on a date, you can, tease or joke around in a way that you couldn't. So even if they speak fluent English, it just shows a respect for the culture and interest if you've learned at least conversational Spanish or a few phrases. So it can never hurt. And also, you're not always going to be dating. So you're going to be in the airport, you're going to be in the cab, you're going to be in a restaurant, you're going to be asking a question if you're at one of the parks. I don't see where it could hurt since it's such an easy language for a person that speaks English to learn because it's a Romance language. I don't see where it would hurt to learn Spanish, especially if you're going to be in a long-term relationship, because the more you're going to end up picking up some of it anyway, because they're going to be speaking it to people that are Mexican even when they're with you. So it can't hurt. And then if you're going into some medium-sized towns, not everybody is going to have a command of English because in the industry that they work in, or if they're just a housewife, there isn't an everyday need for it. They might have picked up some, but because they don't use it every day, it gets rusty.
So
Just
would you
like
say?
if an American didn't use their Spanish all the time.
Yeah. So would you say Mexican women are feminine?
Yes, I would. I say they're very traditional, feminine, like to dress up. I wouldn't say they're dressy. They like to go out, like to dress up, like to listen to music. It's a relatively patriarchal or macho culture. People are looking to marry, people are looking to have children, even if they go to university. People are polite. Um, People are just, there's a clear line of delineation between the genders in terms of, the sitting around watching soccer or drinking beer or things like that, and just or going out and shopping with their girlfriends. the men go out with men for the most part, and the women go out with the women. Like if a guy wants to go buy, like go price something like this is not something people do now, but let's say back in the day, a stereo, he'll take his boy with him. If a woman is going out to shop on weekends, like for clothing or for stuff for the kids or stuff like that, she'll take her girlfriend with her. She doesn't go with her husband.
Mm. Now, would you say it's relatively safe in Mexico?
Yeah, I would, because most of these people that are going to be listening or watching your pod or researching a trip are going to be in a hotel district or a hotel zone, even in the places that don't have a whole bunch of hotels. And the places that don't have a bunch of hotels, like San Miguel de Allende doesn't have a lot. It has some smallish places. They're almost more like inns, but there's no crime there. It's a walkable place, and there's always people out on the street, and there's a bunch of Americans. Puerto Vallarta, much bigger, no crime, no street crime, no anti-tourist crime. Baja, super spread out, no crime, there's no concentrated or congested area. Cancun is more touristy, but again, you're on the property 90% of the time because everything you need is in there. The pool, the gym, the restaurant, the spa is all in there. It's kind of self-contained. So there's no crime inside the property. And then when you go out to do stuff off the property, like tour the pyramids or the ruins or go over to Fifth Avenue, Playa del Carmen to shop for a day, nobody's bothering you. You'll see a little bit of street begging, but not a ton. And a lot of times it's a woman, not a guy,
Oh, wow.
or a woman with a child. And sometimes they're not begging. They're asking you to buy like candy or chiclets or something like that. They're not begging. They just have something. Sometimes people just give them the money even if they don't want the candy. So there's some begging, but not that tough. But
Oh, okay.
I wouldn't say robbery and things like that. It's very safe. People are very friendly, and they know that tourism is was where their bread is buttered.
Mm.
And there's a lot of police. I mean, not a lot of police, but it's very safe because that's a key industry there.
Mm. So, how would you say is the online dating over there in Mexico compared to the West?
Well, I never use an app there because on the media trips I was only going to be there like 4 or 5 days at a time. And even when I was in San Miguel de Allende for, like I said, to talk to this guy about his startup, I wasn't on apps then, so I just met people where I went. Just because in a town like that, like I said, there's only 80,000 people. You probably don't even need an app.
Mm.
Because everywhere you go, I mean, San Miguel de Allende, you're not going to be sitting in the house because there's shops, there's galleries, there's a hamburger spot, there's a gym, there's um, street vendors. So, you can just introduce yourself to somebody every time you go out. And then there's Americans that probably have get-togethers or little, I wouldn't say parties, but get-togethers at their houses. So you're going to meet people there. So I've never really used a dating app in a foreign country, so I can't speak to that. But I'm sure guys can look up which ones are the best to use if you are there. But like I said, I think that depends on how long you're going to be in that country because it's kind of a courtship culture. You're not just going to meet somebody the week that you're there unless it's in a hotel.
Mm. So, what would you say is the negative traits about Mexico? The women there
Well,
in
you just have
Mexico.
to visit different states because, like the U.S. it's very big. So you're not going to see it all by going to Mexico City. You're not going to see it all by going to Cancun. You have to take, week 1 year and go someplace. So in the fall, you might go to Puerto Vallarta. You might try to plan that around like I said, Dia de los Muertos, or what they call Day of the Dead. And maybe in the spring, you might say, well, Cancun is not going to be as pricey in the spring because the winter is over. So the room rates are going to go down. It's not going to be high season. It's going to be shoulder season. So maybe I don't want to go there in April. But to see it all, it's going to take a while because of the huge country. I mean, it goes from one side of for lack of a better term, the U.S. to the opposite side of the U.S. and then everything in between. Like there's parts that are, south of Texas. So I wouldn't say there's a downside, but it takes a minute to see it.
Hmm.
But there's no real downside. The food is great. The people are friendly. The language is easy to learn if you don't already know a little bit. It's close to the U.S. The flights aren't long. All the airlines go there. There's cabs. There's probably Uber now or something resembling Uber. You really don't need, it's turnkey. As soon as you get there, you don't need anything. And in some cases where you're staying, you don't even have to leave the grounds. Some places they'll have retail right in your hotel, shops, bakery, mall, pool, spa, gym. You can, but I mean, you could just walk and literally do everything. So it's not like going to Paris or something where you got to go outside and do this, go outside and do that, go outside and do this, go outside, do that. Because when you get to the big Spanish hotel brands or the big Mexican hotel brands like, Iberostar and Aqua, some of the big Spanish or Mexican brands, everything's on the property, and sometimes 5 different cuisines of restaurant and a buffet. So it's a very easy country to visit for an American. The exchange rate is pretty high, so things don't cost much. And people are familiar with American culture, so it's not like being on the other side of the world.
Hmm. Now I'm curious, how often do they have parties in Mexico?
Well, there's different times of the year that are holidays that are not American holidays. Um, so people have parties for those either in the house or they celebrate them in the clubs. They don't celebrate most of the things that we do except Christmas and, of course, New Year's because it's in the West. But they have things that we don't celebrate. And then there's just parties around personal things like people's birthdays and things like that. So there's a lot of partying. I wouldn't say it's a place you're going to be going to a lot of parties if you're only there a week because you're not going to know anybody and get invited to something like that. But if you were to move there, people would be having parties in their homes. And also, depending on the time of year, there would be occasions that people have parties in the clubs, like some kind of festival or something around a saint or a Catholic occasion that might not be a holiday in the U.S.
Man,
So it's common, but it's more common based on who you know that's inviting you. It's not just like you would know about. You could be there a week and not know about it because nobody would know you to invite you.
Now, what was that actual like festival that was near Halloween? I think it was, what was it called?
The Day of the Dead. They call it Dia
Yeah,
de los
that's what it
Muertos.
was.
So people have an altar that they either build in a park or in front of their house or at a cemetery with pictures and the favorite food or drink or the favorite art or whatever the favorite things are of the relative. They make an altar with all those things, and they visit it once a day during the days of that festival. So it's like a commemoration of the elders in your family that have died previous. It could be an aunt, uncle, grandmother. It could be more than one person. But a lot of families will build like an altar, and they'll put, like, if they liked chewing gum, they'll put some, chewing gum wrappers there. If they liked mezcal, they'll have a little mezcal bottle. If the person was fond of, certain actress, they'll have a little tiny photo of the actress cut out of a magazine or something like that. If the person was into a certain toy or game or baseball, to have a little baseball that, they make an altar symbolizing what that person meant to them, and people go visit it. And then you can see the ones that other families have. They have some of them set up like on a promenade, almost like a boardwalk, the best looking ones. Then some of them are in the cemetery. Some of them are literally in the people's houses. And then some people have their faces painted to also sort of commemorate the occasion. So some people have their faces painted like in the form of almost like a skeleton or other things. So it lasts about 3 to 4 days, but it's around the U.S. Halloween. So it's really the eve of All Saints Day. So that's how they celebrate going into November 1st, which is All Saints Day. It's a very Catholic country. So
Man,
the
I
Day of
remember.
the Dead is literally like to sort of honor the spirits that have already passed on from this realm right before All Saints Day. Whereas in America they trick or treat and they do Halloween, like the Eve of All Hallows, but they don't do that. They actually commemorate literal relatives who have died.
Mm.
So depending on how many family members that they're honoring, they might have, you know, two ancestors that they're honoring, or most people just focus on one, and they build like you'll see pictures of it online or films of it on YouTube, like an altar commemorating that particular person, and that's just who they're going to honor. And they have awards for the best looking ones, and then they have dancing and, like you say,
I remember that too well.
women on horseback. They have other things around the Day of the Dead that don't have anything to do with that particular family that you can go do in public with hundreds of other people.
Mm.
But a lot of it is just walking around looking at all the different people's paintings or pictures or photos of their, let's say, their grandma or their great uncle or their older brother or something like that. And they do it in other parts of the country too. They don't just celebrate it in Puerto Vallarta, but that's one of the hubs that people go to commemorate it. Puerto Vallarta was not a tourist attraction until the mid 1960s when Richard Burton and Elizabeth Taylor filmed a movie there called Night of the Iguana, and they were having a love affair, and tourists heard about it because it was a big news item, when they were first started dating each other, and they kind of lived down there when they were shooting it. So the town became popular after that in the mid 60s, and that's when the hotels and things started to be developed down there right after Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton were dating when they were shooting Night of the Iguana. Before that, it was just a sleepy town, and nobody really paid it much attention except Mexicans. So that's how it became a destination. It was after the Liz and Dick relationship kind of put it on the map, and people are like, oh, I want to go to that place where Elizabeth Taylor and Richard.
Mm. Oh wow.
Other than that, it probably wouldn't even have any tourism. So all of them were built up for different reasons. But San Miguel de Allende really is kind of unspoiled in the sense that it's still kind of quaint, and it doesn't have a hotel zone. It just has inns. Like you could walk by a place and not even notice that it was a hotel if it wasn't for like the little sign hanging over the street, because it just looks like any of the other row houses. But then if you were to walk in it and you see that it has a little bit more rooms in the courtyard, you're like, oh, it's bigger in here than it looks like it would be. But even those tend to be inns. I wouldn't call them like a hotel with elevators and a big lobby and a front. I mean, they have a front desk, but they look just like the houses, so they don't really stand out. So it's a very quiet experience. Like the guests aren't all coming and going at the same time. Whereas if you go to like Puerto Vallarta, if you go to Cabo San Lucas, some of the big chains are going to be there. So there's going to be, big, tall properties where, a bunch of people on the elevator at the same time, a bunch of people at the restaurant at the same time, a bunch of people in the gift shop at the same time.
So how is the religion there in Mexico?
I wouldn't call it ultra religious, but there's still a lot of people that are relatively family oriented, almost all Catholic, some Mayan traditions sprinkled in. And then there's a lot of people who are not observant anymore. These more recent generations are not super observant. It's not a big deal. Smaller towns it might be. But again, there are some ceremonies around certain saints or certain national heroes and people like that, national patriots. Most towns that are medium sized have a central square or central plaza with a relatively big church, just like the cathedral in Puerto Vallarta. Sometimes not as big as that one, but um, it's part of life. I mean, you see people going to and from church on Sunday, but it's not. It's very modern, and it's not as big a part of life as it probably used to be in terms of dating and people's relationships, and being super strict. It's more family oriented in the strictness because of the Catholicism and the need to want to settle down and have your own children and everything like that, because a lot of people come from large families, but the religion is just more part of something that was taught in school than it is something people observe after they get out of school. Like you keep something to keep your grandmother and your aunts happy. You get married in the church, you don't see a ton of people going to church. But it's a respectful culture. It's a respectful culture of religion because it was such a big deal, because Spain was Catholic. So it's very respected, but not everybody observes and goes to service every Sunday.
So, what would you say the dangers are to be aware of in Mexico?
I wouldn't say there really are any. Just research the part that you're going to, look up some things online, maybe watch some travel shows. If you have an agent, talk to that person and see what they recommend. But I wouldn't say there's any inherent or super concerning dangers about going to Mexico, especially for a Yank. Now I'm a male, so it's different. But I mean, even I've been down there, and on the media trips, they're women journalists and women influencers. There's nothing. It's like I said, if you're in a touristy town, you're in the property most of the time, unless you go out to eat off the property. You go out to eat off the property. You go in a restaurant. There's a whole bunch of people in there, so it's not like you're walking around. Like if you're in San Miguel de Allende, you're walking all the time because it's not touristy. But it's not dangerous. The guys, it's not dangerous. And there's a lot of Yanks. If you're in Puerto Vallarta, you would kind of need a car, like a rental. If you're in Baja, just because it's so spread out, Cabo San Lucas, you probably need a car because nothing is near each other. Except, when you're whatever spot you're staying in, you don't need it that particular time. But if you go off the property to go see much of anything, you're going to need a ride. So you're going to be in a car. So you're not going to be around Mexicans. So I wouldn't say there's anything particular to watch out for, because you're not going to be in the towns where there's any trouble, because nobody goes there. You're not going to be in a cartel town. You're not going to be in a town that has gangs because they don't have tourists.
Now,
there's no gang activity in the places that have tourists because, if they allowed it, nobody would go. Just like they wouldn't allow it in New York, they wouldn't allow it in Orlando because nobody would go to Orlando or, whatever the big tourist towns in the U.S. are. Nobody would visit them if it was just rampant with, it wouldn't be safe. Nobody would come there. Like if Times Square was just if street gangs were just running around in Times Square, you wouldn't see people down there taking pictures. So that's pretty much the way Mexico is. And it's enormous, so, I mean, you could be down there literally and not leave the property if you were in one of the big hotels, like a Westin size hotel or a Hilton or Marriott or W or one of those size hotels, you literally, unless you just didn't want to eat on the property and didn't want to eat the 5 kinds of food that they have in there all week, and you just said, let's try something, let's go in town, you could literally not leave. So there's no danger. Because everybody you're going to be around is a tourist. Like I said, unless you're in San Miguel de Allende. And there's other cities that I didn't name, but I just haven't been to those. I'm just naming like 4 or 5 that I've spent a lot of time in. Because I was in San Miguel de Allende for the better part of a couple of weeks. And I'm actually might go back in the spring because the guy that invited me down to talk about his startup and creating some content for them actually has like 2 vacant bedrooms in his place. As a matter of fact, there was a thought of me going back in September and renting one from him, but some work came up in the States because he was out of the country. He was actually going to, he was going to let me, he was out of the country for a while, for like part of August and September, because he's dating somebody that he wasn't dating when I met him. She's a filmmaker, and she went to, I think they went to like Rome and Milan, and then she had a film in the Venice Film Festival, and then they went to some other countries in Europe, and then his kids joined them in one. He has grown kids. His kids joined them in some part of Europe. Maybe it might have been a part of Italy. So I was actually going to stay like around 30 days or something while they were gone, but some work came up in the States. But I may go back in the fall. He has house guests now, but I may go back in the not fall, in the spring when his house guests leave, because it's a walkable town. I know my way around now because I was there for a couple of weeks in September 2019. And I like San Miguel Allende. It's very doable. Nobody's in your business. It's an easy, it's easy to figure out like what you want to eat, different nights. There's a lot of Americans to talk to. You don't need a car. It's super safe. It's got cobblestone streets. It's very picturesque. People are pretty friendly, although they don't really, I wouldn't say friendly in like a hello, how are you kind of way, but just don't bother you. And you get a lot of work done. It's quiet and it's not touristy. Now there's tourists there, but not all one time a year. Like, oh, we're just going there in the winter because it's cold somewhere else. So there's tourists there, but they're either in their rooms or you only see them at dinner time. Like if they go out to a restaurant that's off their property, because not all the inns have a full-blown restaurant. Or some of them only serve breakfast.
Oh, wow, man.
Never like a throng of Germans or a throng of Brits or a throng of Canadians just packing the streets in San Miguel Allende. And I think that's why people like it, because it's like a town in the Old West looking place with cobblestone streets and row houses and, generally pretty quiet unless there's a commemoration going on. Now, there is a time of year where people come from all different parts of Mexico, other states, to go there for a certain ceremony, but that's just for a short time in September. But I heard it's super crowded. Then I heard it compared to like standing in Times Square New Year's Eve. That's how crowded it is while that's going on. Like uncomfortable crowded. Because people are coming from other parts of the like literally not even from that state to go to that thing. It's called El Grito. Somebody shouts from a window. Like not shouts, but probably like sings a little, chants something from a window. El Grito means shout in Spanish. So people come from all over to see that. And they probably have to like, someone probably have to stand on tippy toes. It gets so crowded. But I wasn't there then. I missed it by about.
All right, guys.
Where I left was about a week or a week and a half right before that.
Mm. Now, before we actually end the live stream, is there any last words for the viewers when they want to travel to Mexico?
No, I would say most people have probably they've been to Cancun and Playa del Carmen. Some of the people in California and the West Coast have probably been more to Baja and maybe in some cases Puerto Vallarta, certainly Cabo. Some of them went to Cabo on their spring breaks when they were in undergrad. But I would say branch out, see some other parts of the country, see some of the quieter places, not just the ones that have big developed hotel zones. You might like them a little better. Brush up on your Spanish. Try to watch some Spanish speaking TV or listen to some Spanish speaking radio. You can catch on pretty quickly. And don't take too many preconceived notions. Don't listen to your relatives about cartels and gangs, and just go there and have fun.
And there you have it, guys. Make sure to look after yourselves from around the world, and I'll see you guys on the next live stream. Have a good one.
Get your passport, guys. Thanks for having me on.
No problem.